Okay. I'm Dr. Tommy Givens, and my area of expertise here at Fuller Theological Seminary is New Testament primarily. I also do some teaching in Christian ethics. Today I want to talk to you about the Gospel according to Matthew. It's the first book of the New Testament, and so it opens this whole second part of the canon of Christian scripture. And the way that it begins is especially fitting because it invites us to understand who Jesus is according to this story that is now unfolding in Matthew as part of a larger story, the larger story of the people of Israel, and really the larger story of God and the world that God has created. The Gospel of Matthew is structured rather famously as segments of narrative or story that are then followed by discourses of Jesus's teaching. And when Jesus is giving an extended discourse in Matthew, it's actually part of the story itself. So the words that Jesus says, what he teaches, is of a piece with his life. It's part of who he is, so that his actions and his words are in intimate relation to one another throughout the story. One of the most important themes of the Gospel of Matthew, in my mind, that's especially important for Christians of our time to notice and to consider, is that Jesus has come to his own people as they are gathered in their adopted and now occupied homeland, the land of Israel, and he has come to fulfill the law and the prophets by which they've been living and hoping for generations. And that means that Jesus refuses to give up on his community. He refuses to give up on what's familiar, even when that grows to be apparently stubborn at times or difficult. And so often I think we have turned to Jesus from within the church to send us on a mission far away, or to regard ourselves as Christians as somehow the new or the true people of God as compared to others in the past. And that doesn't really fit the story of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew is about a person sent from God to be the King of all kings, and to do that refuses to give up on his own people in their own homeland. And it's because of Jesus's dogged faithfulness to his own people, to not bypass them rushing on to somewhere else, that he is, according to Matthew, the hope of all the peoples of the world. So it's important to see that in Matthew, the hope of the world depends on the faithfulness of God to what God has already committed God's self, the faithfulness of Jesus to those who are near, to the people to whom Jesus is committed, whether they embrace him or not. And this, I think, should affect our vision of what it means to follow Jesus, because we often romanticize that following Jesus or engaging in Christian mission will necessarily take us far away to something that strikes us as exotic, or move us to do something very dramatic and flashy. But that's not what we find in Matthew. Instead, we find Jesus working with what is mundane, what is familiar, what is near to him. And that is a crucial message to us today, to see that the calling of Jesus, according to the Gospel of Matthew, invites us to invest our lives deeply in our own neighbors, people that we cross paths with every day, to our own places, the places where we live that are familiar, and to see all of the power of God's kingdom unfold there, as opposed to imagining that it's always far away at the other end of some rainbow. The passage of Matthew that I'd like to read is a well-known one, but I think it captures who Jesus is according to this first gospel of the New Testament. It comes in the beginning of Jesus' first discourse of teaching, Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Whoever then relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches other human beings the same shall be called least in the kingdom from heaven. But the one who does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom from heaven. For I tell you, unless your justice surpasses that of scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom from heaven." Here Jesus clarifies that there is nothing about what Moses taught in all of its detail that he means to set aside, but to be the embodiment of all that Moses commanded and all that the prophets hope for. What is striking about this is that we often imagine that the authorities of Jesus' day were perhaps too conservative, too rigid when it came to the law. But here it's clear that Jesus' concern is not that they are too conservative with the law and the prophets, but that they are not conservative enough. They're not being rigorous or serious enough about the justice that is taught in the law and the justice for which the prophets call. And so for Jesus, the justice that is part of the kingdom coming from heaven requires a serious study and commitment to all that the law and the prophets say. So to follow Jesus is not to set those aside, but to be committed to their fulfillment in our life. Most of the time we read Matthew as if we didn't have to spend any time thinking about the Sabbath, thinking about land, thinking about how workers and animals are treated, thinking about how relationships between peoples might avail for peace rather than war. But these are exactly the aims of the law and the prophets that Jesus has come to teach and to enact down to the details. And so that's the way that the story of Matthew reverberates through future generations and has come down to us. People learn Jesus' ways and they have taught them to others using this story. And that's, of course, why we read the story, to learn Jesus' ways and to be able to share them with others as we pursue the justice of this kingdom coming from heaven.